Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has vetoed the mandatory use of face masks despite the country's COVID-19 health crisis. The United States has now reached a total of more than 3 million COVID-19 cases as some states move to reimpose restrictions. China and India have agreed to complete the withdrawal of troops from the line of control in their border region as soon as possible. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. And we begin in Brazil, where President Jair Bolsonaro has vetoed the mandatory use of face masks despite the country's COVID-19 health crisis. President Bolsonaro noted that the veto on the mandatory use of face masks also extended to the prison system, which holds over 700,000 inmates, most of whom in overcrowded conditions. Bolsonaro also removed regulations that ordered establishments to report on the preventative measures taken to curb the spread of the virus. This move comes as Brazil reports over 1.6 million COVID-19 cases and a death toll of more than 65,000. And Brazil's former president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, recently hailed China's efforts in the fight against COVID-19 and stressed that his country should have learned from China as the number of cases climbed to 1.6 million this Sunday.
That is another unbelievable thing. I mean, unlike China, that has a crisis in one city and was able to isolate the city immediately in a way that did not allow the coronavirus to spread across the country, Brazil did the opposite. The president of Brazil first did not believe in the coronavirus, then thought it was something from China. He said it was a small flu that wouldn't harm anyone, and the number of infected by the virus is only growing, and also the number of dead. And the president should have learned from China, should have learned from other countries that treated the situation of the coronavirus in a more sophisticated and humane way.
The Argentinian government presented its amended debt restructuring proposal to creditors this Sunday. The Ministry of Economy, headed by Martin Guzman, announced that it will present a new payment offer to bondholders to the US Securities and Exchange Commission. The minister also announced the deadline of August 4th for creditors to accept the proposal and noted that the proposal will be sent to Congress over sovereign debt restructuring in the next few days. According to the ministry, this plan aims to restore sustainability and redefine future financial obligations so that they are compatible with the economy's payment possibilities. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has confirmed details of his official visit to the United States as part of his first international tour. During a press conference, the president announced that he will meet with his US counterpart, Donald Trump, on Wednesday. The main topic to be discussed is the new North American Free Trade Agreement, which entered into force this month. President López Obrador also highlighted that this agreement between Mexico, the US and Canada opens a way to economic integration and guarantees fair salaries and employment benefits in the three countries.
The objective of this visit is linked to the new stage of trade relations with the United States and Canada, with the entry into force of the agreement, which we consider an important step and particularly timely, as it ensures economic integration with respect for our sovereignty and allows us to consolidate our position as a productive economic commercial region in the world.
In the Dominican Republic, the Central Electoral Board released the preliminary results of the general elections held on Sunday, with opposition candidate Luis Abinada having secured more than 50% of the votes to be declared president. With more than 82.97% of the vote counted, the candidate for the Modern Revolutionary Party leads the race with 52.51% of the vote, followed by the candidate for the Dominican Liberation Party, Gonzalo Castillo, with 37.69% of the vote. Meanwhile, in third place is the representative of the People's Force Party, former President Leonel Fernandez, with 8.72%. Turnout was 45.63%. Meanwhile, ruling party presidential candidate Gonzalo Castillo has conceded defeat to Luis Abinada, whose landslide victory marks the end of 16 years of rule by the Dominican Liberation Party, which achieved one of the strongest economic growth rates in Latin America, but faced criticism over growing inequality and its handling of the COVID-19 outbreak in the country. So far, the nation of 10.4 million inhabitants has reported more than 38,000 cases and over 800 deaths. The Cuban government has sent 3 additional medical brigades to African countries to help fight the COVID-19 pandemic. The 3 brigades of the Henry Reeve International Contingent were sent to Sierra Leone, Equatorial Guinea and Sao Tome and Principe. The team sent to Sierra Leone is led by Dr. Tanya Ballart and is made up of 76 health professionals, while 19 other specialists are travelling to Sao Tome and Principe. Cuba continues to be committed to cooperation and solidarity with the African peoples, and Cuban health professionals are already providing their services in 9 African countries. And our correspondent in Havana, Laura Palmero, brings us a roundup of news from the Caribbean region.
Thanks for the contact. These are the most recent stories and news from the Caribbean countries. And let's start with Cuba, where the President Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermudez highlighted the importance of the Sao Paulo Forum on its 30th anniversary.
The president tweeted to point out that Simón Bolívar and José Martí nurtured Fidel Castro and Hugo Chávez with the ideology of the revolutions they forged, and that unity and integration were their great obsessions. The Sao Paulo Forum was created at the initiative of Fidel Castro and Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva, and it sought to become a stage for concerted action by left-wing forces in the region in the face of the advance of neoliberalism. The Cuban Medical Brigade in Belize is on the front line of the fight against COVID-19, and the women who make it play a key role. Cuba's medical cooperation started more than 30 years ago, and since then, hundreds of physicians, licentiates, and health technicians have visited the country. All of them have rendered their services in all 6 districts of the nation. The country and its authorities had been preparing to fight this disease and joined another one already in the country and are helping to fight the pandemic. These professionals are part of the Henry Reeve International Contingent of doctors specialized in situations of disasters and serious epidemics, which was established on September 19, 2005 by the leader of the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro. The modern Revolutionary Party candidate Luis Abinader is today the president-elect of the Dominican Republic and takes on the challenge of leading a country devastated by a pandemic and immersed in a great economic crisis. Although in the last few weeks the polls predicted the victory of the opposition candidate, most of the experts had predicted he would be the new president, but in a runoff vote. The results show the polls were not wrong, as Abinader won the established majority of 50% plus 1, breaking off the hegemony of the Dominican Liberation Party in recent years. Abinader is a 52-year-old economic and businessman from the province of Santiago. The politician is the first Latin American president elected in time of COVID-19 and also the first to take office after falling sick with the disease.
And also about the bilateral relations between Cuba and Belize, it is important to highlight the cultural event taking place next year, La Fiesta del Fuego.
The 41st edition of Festival del Caribe 2021 will celebrate the 61st anniversary of the Cuban Revolution and the political and social accomplishments of the Cuban revolutionary process. The annual Fiesta del Fuego, or Fire Festival, will take place from June 30 to July 6, 2021 in the city of Santiago de Cuba. The aim of the Fire Festival is to highlight the cultural expressions of the region, which is well portrayed by the many parades and carnival held during the week. The Fire Festival is a very well-known street party and is known to be celebrated by the majority of the streets. On the 2021, this cultural event will be dedicated to Belize, which shows the 25-year-old fluid bilateral relations between both countries.
And these are the most recent stories and news from Caribbean countries. Let's go back with you in the studio.
Thank you, Laura, and we're taking a very short break now, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The United States has now reached a total of more than 3 million COVID-19 cases. Our correspondent in Washington, Jorge Estoso, brings us more details on the situation there.
Thank you. After the 4th of July holiday, where most of the Americans didn't respect social distancing and were not wearing masks. The cases already passed the 3 million in the US and the death 132,000. Even though today the White House was saying that the US is, quote unquote, setting an example in the world on COVID-19, and also the president during the weekend said that 99% of the cases are, quote unquote, harmless. We're talking that 40 out of the 50 states are showing cases in the rise. Then in case of 4 states, we're talking California, Arizona, Texas, and Florida, we are reaching the maximum volume in terms of hospitalizations and the capacity of the hospitals to care about the cases with needing of intensive care units. And most definitely, the crisis of the coronavirus is far from being over and under control. We get back to you now.
Thank you, Jorge. Regional authorities in Galicia, Spain, announced a lockdown in the coastal district of Almería, located on Spain's northern Atlantic coast, following a COVID-19 outbreak. The decision came a day after regional authorities in northeast Catalonia locked down an area with over 200,000 inhabitants. Both lockdowns only allow residents to leave the areas for work and other extenuating circumstances. The small-scale lockdowns come 2 weeks after Spain ended a national state of emergency that saw the government lock down the entire country and ban travel between provinces or certain areas from mid-March. Over 28,000 people have died due to COVID-19 in Spain, where more than 297,000 cases have been reported.
We don't respect the rules, and these are the consequences.
We have 3 people who are hospitalized. All others are in their homes with mild symptoms. The average age of the people who have been infected is 35 years. Therefore, this is a cluster among young people, healthy people, and all of the people who are in nursing homes for the elderly in Almería. We have tested all of them, and all of them are free of the virus.
Hospitals in the Ukrainian region of Lviv have seen a huge surge in patients needing to be hospitalized as the country's COVID-19 infection rate has begun rising again following the lifting of a national lockdown. Psycho's hospital in one of the worst affected regions of Ukraine is still treating ordinary emergency patients, but for the first time since the pandemic began, it is now also admitting suspected coronavirus cases. According to the head of the intensive care unit, the hospital began treating COVID-19 patients because the city needs more beds. In June, the World Health Organization listed Ukraine among 24 European countries that have seen resurgences of the virus. The country has confirmed almost 50,000 cases and over 1,200 deaths.
We have 50 places for patients with COVID-19. They are all occupied now. Over the weekend, patients were sent to our hospital because they knew that we are accepting everyone. Here, patients are in severe or medium conditions.
Irish Health Minister Stephen Donnelly announced that Ireland's COVID-19 contact tracing app will finally be launched on Tuesday after a lengthy delay.
One of the things that we're doing tomorrow is we're launching a COVID tracker app. This could be, and hopefully will be, a really powerful part of the toolkit in fighting this disease. It will allow us to get on with contact tracing in a matter of hours. It will allow people who have the app to completely control their own data. There will be no centralisation of data.
India has overtaken Russia to become the 3rd worst affected nation by the COVID-19 pandemic after reporting almost 24,000 new cases on Sunday. India's total number of cases has now surpassed 720,000 after a further 22,500 cases were reported on Monday. Meanwhile, the death toll stands at over 20,000. Despite the surge in cases, India's Culture Ministry decided to reopen all monuments across the country on Monday after more than 3 months with a cap on the number of visitors and the mandatory wearing of face masks. After a strict nationwide lockdown, authorities have eased restrictions in most of the country except for the highest risk areas.
The current scenario is of coronavirus. Earlier, there used to be less testing, and now the government has increased the testing, so people have facilities. So there is no problem here at the hospital. Come and enroll your name as part of the process and get tested. No problem at all.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and National Security Advisor to the Indian Prime Minister Ajit Doval agreed to complete the withdrawal of troops from the line of control in the Ladakh border region as soon as possible. The senior officials agreed to implement all agreements reached between the border troop commanders of the two countries. Furthermore, during the telephone conversation that took place on July 5th, both parties agreed to avoid turning existing contradictions into conflict, to respect all signed agreements on the border issue, and to prevent future incidents that would undermine peace and tranquility in the area. On July 6, it was reported that the Indian and Chinese military personnel had begun dismantling temporary facilities in Ladakh and withdrawing troops from the line of control. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs has stated that the United States has deliberately sent ships into the South China Sea. Foreign Ministry spokesman Xiao Lishan made the statements during a press conference after answering a question about two U.S. aircraft carriers, the USS Ronald Reagan and the USS Nimitz, which are undertaking military exercises in that area of the Pacific Ocean. Xiao accused Washington of having ulterior motives behind such operations and of creating a gap between the countries of the region, causing problems between Beijing and Southeast Asian nations as the US militarizes the South China Sea. State media reported that China is ready to respond to the US moves. In Libya, thousands demonstrated in the eastern city of Benghazi on Sunday against what they claim is Turkish interference in the country's domestic affairs. The protesters carried banners bearing pictures and slogans attacking Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his Libyan ally Fayez al-Sarraj, Prime Minister of the UN-backed government based in Tripoli. They also carried signs in support of the eastern-based Libyan National Army and its leader Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar. Libya has been in turmoil since 2011, when a NATO-led invasion saw the assassination of President Muammar al-Gaddafi and pushed the once prosperous nation into an ongoing conflict.
To the Turkish people, you destroyed your interest in Libya, and your relationship with Libya has ended, and your reputation has been damaged. The reputation of the Turks was good here. We have Turkish buildings and Turkish companies, and we have Turkish restaurants, and we have Turkish workers. But now your image has been destroyed by Erdogan, for he is a dirty Muslim Brotherhood person, a dirty dog, and he has nothing to do with our country.
In Africa, the total number of confirmed COVID-19 cases has reached 480,000. As the continent struggles to control the pandemic, in the last 24 hours, more than 13,000 new coronavirus cases have been confirmed. Africa now has a death toll of about 12,000, with nearly 300 fatalities reported in the last 24 hours. The most affected countries are South Africa, Egypt and Nigeria. No deaths have been reported in Seychelles, Eritrea, Uganda, Namibia and Lesotho. Burundi's new president, Evariste Ndayishimiye, has declared the coronavirus the country's biggest enemy in a major change of discourse for a nation which had largely ignored the dangers of the virus. Former President Pierre Nkurunziza, who died suddenly last month, and one death in 2 months. Kenya's president announced on Monday a phased reopening of the country, lifting restrictions on travel in and out of the capital, Nairobi, and allowing air travel to resume. President Uhuru Kenyatta said the country has reached a reasonable level of preparedness for a partial loosening of restrictions, but urged caution and warned against reckless behaviour. In a televised address, he noted that the ban on movement into and out of the Nairobi metropolitan area, Mombasa County and Mandera County will be lifted on Tuesday. Domestic, commercial and passenger flights are scheduled to restart on July 15th, while international travel will resume from August 1st.
According to experts and stakeholders, we have not yet met the irreducible minimum 100%. However, after further dialogue amongst them, we have reached a reasonable level of preparedness across the country. And I repeat again, we have not yet met 100%, but we have met a reasonable level of preparedness across our counties. That international air travel into and out of the territory of the Republic of Kenya shall resume effective the 1st of August 2020, once again in strict conformity with all protocols from the Ministry of Health, local, as well as international civil aviation authorities.
This Monday, the Republic of Malawi celebrates 56 years of independence from British colonial rule. We take a look at the events leading up to this historic moment.
The southeastern African country, landlocked between the Lake Nyasa and Zambia, is known in the region as the warm heart of Africa due to the friendliness of its people. In 1944, the anti-colonial trends in the country created the Nyasaland African Congress to promote local interests to the British government. The former Nyasaland became in 1953 a British protectorate within the so-called Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, a move that was rejected by the nationalists of the NAC, alleging the federation was only retarding independence. In 1958, Hastings Bandan returned to the country, who was elected president of the NAC, and worked to mobilize nationalist sentiment before being jailed by colonial authorities in 1959. Banda was released 1 year later and continued to work for the total independence of the country, until the federation was dissolved in 1963 and the new republic emerged. Today, the country is very well integrated in the region, in organization as the Southern African Development Community.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find